Got a lot to dive into. NFL news and notes. John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. FanRag Sports NFL National Football columnist at JF McMullen, as he was in attendance today for a couple of Eagle defenders. Got to sit down and talk to the media, one being Jordan Hicks, the other one Brandon Graham, and both of them had some interesting things to say, starting with Jordan Hicks, John, who, really excited about being in year number 2 in Jim Schwartz's defense. But when I look at Jordan Hicks, and you say play word associations, Jordan Hicks, I would say face of the defense.
Yeah, in a lot of ways he is, because he's turned into one heck of a playmaker, and I know I didn't see that coming, and he is – early in his career, he's been one of the best linebackers in football. And just from the nature of the position, middle linebacker, you have to be a leader, and he's taken over, and rightfully so, because arguably we can say Fletcher Cox, we can say Malcolm Jenkins, but it's at least time to put Jordan Hicks in the conversation, because he keeps making plays when he's out there. And he's one of the best Eagles defensive players. So from a number of levels, on field and the job description, and the fact that he's such a good communicator, he's a leader of this football team.
No doubt. You say he's one of, if not the best, and maybe right now defensively, Jim Schwartz would be smart to start, building around him as the kind of the centerpiece of that defense, which, hey, you got to give Chip Kelly thanks to that. We all criticized that pick. It seems that the one thing that Chip Kelly got criticized for when times were good turned out to be the one thing that has worked out for this team. What are some of the things, talking about Jordan Hicks, that he discussed today about that needs to get better on this defense moving forward?
Well, I think the fact, both guys, Brandon and Jordan, emphasized year 2 in Jim Schwartz's system and just the comfort level. And for Jordan specifically, he mentioned he's been in 6 different defenses in 8 years, going back to high school, really. So he's excited to be in the same defense for a second straight season. And the fact that he's also healthy for off-season work. If you remember, he was coming off the torn pec the year prior. He couldn't do much, especially in the weight room in the off-season. And he looked like he said he wasn't bigger weight-wise, but he was stronger. But he certainly looked bigger, and he certainly looked stronger. And that's the one thing you project about Jordan Hicks as a whole, because I've always thought he's better equipped to be a weak side linebacker than a middle linebacker long term. But the guy who showed up today, all of a sudden you start to think, if he's got the same speed, if he's got the same athletic ability, and he's going to be that big, well, he can make middle linebacker his position for the rest of his career.
Yeah, and one thing for sure, it won't be Stephen Tulloch backing him up this year, because Stephen Tulloch announced that he will retire today, so you would assume that Jordan Hicks will remain the man in the middle. That's his long-term spot in Philadelphia?
Yeah, it looks that way. And Joe Walker's coming back. That's a guy the Eagles liked. This is a 7th-round pick last year. Hurt his knee, had to go on IR. So, and that's the reason they brought Stephen Tulloch in originally, because they were very high on Joe Walker, thought he was going to make the football team. And we'll see when we get the access to guys and they get to start ramping up on the field. But all things, and Jordan even mentioned, Joe looks good, so he'll probably move right in as the backup. But yeah, as a whole, this unit, Jordan Hicks is going to be the leader of the linebacking crew, and really the leader of the defense as a whole.
Talking with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. That was Jordan Hicks who spoke today. We talked a little bit about him. Brandon Graham also spoke today, John. And what do you think of Brandon Graham? There were all the pro football focuses of the world and people out there that ranked him as a top 5 player at his position. Did you see a guy that was that impactful, a top 5 defensive end? Because it seems that the Eagles are still looking for pass rush. Is that an indictment on him, or is that an indictment on the other side of the line?
No, that was an indictment on Connor Barwin and Vinny Curry, who didn't perform up to what the team hoped for, certainly Vinny especially. And Connor's obviously moved on. It was difficult for Connor because he was changing positions, and not only changing positions, but also changing sides of the field. It was generally a strong side linebacker, and all of a sudden he's supposed to be a weak side pass rusher as a defensive end. So you could see that was not going to work out well, and it didn't work out well. But the Eagles didn't really have other options when Vinny Curry didn't step up into that role. Brandon Graham was a star last year. He was tremendous. He was arguably the Eagles' best defensive player. I think he was as a whole. He was right there with Hicks. You can make the argument. I think he was better than Fletcher Cox. He was better than Malcolm Jenkins. And it's interesting because he bloomed so late in his career. I mean, for years, everyone was decrying that draft and saying, why didn't we take Earl Thomas? Why not Jason Pierre-Paul? And all of a sudden, Brandon Graham turned into the player the Eagles thought he would be. And it really was a bit of a surprise because if you go back to this time last year, the talk was Curry and Barwin were going to be the starters, and Graham was going to be the third man in the rotation. But he just seized the left end position, and he was one of the best 4 or 5 edge players in this league last year, and the Eagles expect that to continue. But the fact that they need a complement, that's an indictment of the other guys.
John, Graham said something interesting. He said he needs to see a finished roster before he proclaims that this is a playoff team. Is that him indicating like, hey, we need more help on defense before I throw out any kind of predictions here?
No, I mean, I think that's more of an indication that it's April, it's before the draft, so you don't know who is going to be out there and who's going to take over for some veteran players that have been part of this defense specifically for a long time. Up front, Connor Barwin, Benny Logan. We all know Tim Jernigan's here. We all know Chris Long's here. But until you get really into training camp, and Brandon made sure to mention it's not about OTAs, it's about training camp. When you get to see guys with the pads on, you really can't tell. And I think he was just being honest. And that's for every team. That's just not the Eagles.
How about, do you see the Eagles bringing or targeting a defensive end in the draft? Which round do you see them taking one if you do see them targeting a defensive end?
Yeah, I mean, they're going to bring one in, and they could even bring one in at number 14 overall. It's one of those positions. Edge rusher is one of the potential positions they could use that first-round pick on. It's right there with cornerback and running back and wide receiver. Those are the kind of 4 places you can hone in on. And then I think it's about who they think is the best player available amongst those 4 positions. And if they think it's Derek Barnett, for instance, who Brandon mentioned a little bit today, they'll take him. And we'll see how that shakes out. I think they could get better value at 14, but if you like a player and you believe he's worthy of that pick, you take him. And certainly the Eagles could be looking at an edge rusher at 14 overall. But even if they don't go, they're certainly going to bring in one at some point in this draft.
Derek Barnett breaking Reggie White's records at Tennessee. Maybe that would have something good for Eagles fans to chew around. Well, John, let's talk to you a little bit about some more Eagles news that came out today, and that's about the tight end position and Brent Celek. There's a report out there from ESPN's Field Yates that says Celek has taken another pay cut. He'll now earn $3 million this year instead of $4 million. How much does that help the Eagles, and does this indicate that there's some other kind of move up Howie's sleeve?
Well, Howie's always trying to get a little bit of room here and there, and he's done it throughout the offseason, and that's what we always talk about. When we started the free agency process, the Eagles didn't have any money, basically, and he's able to sort of move things around. Zach Ertz redid his contract at the same position. and he continuously does that type of thing. And I think it's the realization that Brent is obviously in the latter stages of his career. I think the Eagles like Trey Burton. He's getting a big raise this year. So it's just the reality of the situation. They respect Brent to the team, but also with the acknowledgement that, it's possible that the two top tight ends on this team for the first time in a long time is not going to include Brent Celek, because there's a possibility it's Zach Ertz and Trey Burton. And if you're going to be a third-string tight end and you want to stay employed, well, you're probably going to have to take less money.
Yeah, and Jordan Hicks today kind of, gave praise to Brent Celek, for the betterment of the team. And Celek's kind of been that kind of guy. That's why he remains a fan favorite. Not that he's been a scrub or anything, but as his play and stats have deteriorated over the years, he has kind of been the quote-unquote John Philly guy.
Yeah, he is. I mean, he's always been a selfless guy. Even when he was when he was a bigger part of the offense, he was still a very selfless player, and he has been throughout his career. And you certainly don't expect that to change as things get in the twilight. And that's where he is, and I think he understands that. But he's still got an important role on this team. He's by far the best blocking tight end that remains here. So he'll have his role. It's just not as pronounced as it once was.
John, some other interesting things. I really thought, to have Hicks and Graham, the two leaders of the defense, both coming out today saying some things. One, Hicks, another thing that's kind of swept under the rug here is he's been hurt a lot. Coming out of college, he had the pec muscle. His rookie year, he was hurt entering the league. Not having to rehab coming in, and how a lot of times that gets lost on how important it is for the progression of players to be able to do a regular offseason and not have to do the rehabbing of an injury during the offseason.
Yeah, it's big, and we made a lot of it a couple of years ago when Sam Bradford was finally healthy for an off season. And I think you saw it in his play. He improved for the ability to instead of rehabbing, actually go through some of the things you need to do to improve as a football player. And that's what I mentioned. I mean, Jordan looks bigger. He looks stronger. He looks far more ready to be a middle linebacker in April of this year than he did in April of last year. And a lot of us question whether he could hold up at middle linebacker as a whole. And when they did bring in Stephen Tulloch, the question was, are they going to insert Tulloch because he had a long history with Jim Schwartz as the middle linebacker and put Hicks on the weak side? And that would have made sense. But he battled through it, and I think he's just a physically more mature guy. There's a big difference between – I don't think people realize, when you come into the NFL at 21 or 22, a lot of times you're, facing off against real grown men who have, been lifting weights for years and are just these monsters as far as strength goes, and it's something young players struggle with. And it looks like Jordan Hicks is sort of fast-forwarding to that second part of the career where he's starting to grow into his body and become a much stronger player.
John, something I found interesting was Brandon Graham talking about what he expects out of Vinny Curry, and Curry's shape coming into the offseason workouts says we're going to make that leap that we've been waiting for. Do you buy that Curry is going to make that leap?
Well, I'm going to have to see it, certainly before I buy it. I mean, Vinny's very, very popular, and really the grouping of Vinny Curry, Fletcher Cox, Benny Logan when he was here, and Brandon were very, very close, are very close. And so they're always going to have each other's back. But the Eagles were disappointed. And the reason they are talking about adding an edge rusher is because Vinny Curry did not play nearly up to what they thought he would. And, yeah, we're going to have to see it before we assume that Vinny Curry is going to be a difference maker on this defense. And In fact, if you were to ask me right now, I would probably lean towards Chris Long being the starter over Vinny Curry. But we'll see how things shake out.
And another thing Graham brought up today that I found interesting was, we talked yesterday about rebuilding and reloading, and Graham had said signing Chris Long, it's about reloading. That their mindset is too that, we're just trying to add to the defense. We had Barwin, he's gone. We bring in Long, and we're just kind of reloading that position. But that other side, as you kind of indicated earlier, is a very important part because Graham also said that he would be surprised if Roseman drafts a defensive end. So he is acknowledging what we hinted at earlier, that they need a couple of pieces on that defensive side of the ball, one being end, certainly needing the other being corners.
Yeah, and I think you saw it numerous times. If you watch Eagles games last year, you'll often see Brandon Graham or Fletcher Cox getting significant pass rush, and the other parts to that weren't there. So quarterbacks were able to either climb the pocket or extend the play outside because the other parts weren't working at an optimal level. And they've addressed the interior rush. Tim Jernigan is a better pass rusher than Betty was. And on the outside, even if they don't draft an edge rusher, Chris Long, at least, although he's obviously late in his career, at least he's a real defensive end. And he's been very successful rushing the passer in this league. So at the bare minimum, he should be able to provide more than Connor Barwin did last year. So at least on paper, they've done a good job addressing the parts of the pass rush that weren't there last season.
John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com. By the way, the NFL schedule released at 8 o'clock on Thursday night. That's the another night in the NFL calendar, if you will. Some NFL news and notes with John here. By the way, Jameis Winston and the Buccaneers, they lobbied for, and they will get the Hard Knocks gig, so it will not be the Eagles. They were a team that was under consideration for some sort of they had the qualifications to be considered. They wanted nothing to do with it, but the Buccaneers lobbied. They got it, so it'll be the Buccaneers on Hard Knocks this year. Some NFL news, by the way. Mike Gillislee, he is, for the second year, a Buffalo Bill restricted free agent, is heading to New England there, John.
Well, not necessarily. The Bills can still match. We'll see.
Right,
obviously,
but they're unlikely to match, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're up against it from a salary cap standpoint, and the Patriots did what they do and then put kind of a poison pill in there, so it will hurt the Bills if they do match it. And obviously, if you look at what Chris Hogan was able to do in some big spots, it doesn't look good for Buffalo. But, I would argue if Hogan remained on the Bills, he wouldn't be all that effective. And Gillislee is obviously a backup running back. He was very good as a backup to Shady McCoy. But just because you're good on New England doesn't necessarily you're going to be good somewhere else. The Eagles know that with Eric Rowe and Patrick Chung. So sometimes fans overreact to that kind of stuff. And let's be honest, the Patriots are the Patriots, and they tend to utilize players better than other teams might.
Hey, 20 NFL teams will lose chartered flights, boo-hoo, but the Eagles aren't one of them.
That's a big deal, as we all know. You don't want to be dragged off the plane.
I've seen the pictures of that Eagles charter plane. It's pretty respectable.
Yeah, well, and then you'll have the people arguing, if you're a billionaire, why can't you get your own plane? So, that's the kind of stuff that I wouldn't be too worried. The 32 NFL teams will figure out travel, and it'll be pretty nice.
A total of 23 teams opened their off-season programs yesterday, and today the entire league is back to work, including the Philadelphia Eagles. We'll have more on the Eagles and the NFL with John tomorrow when we do NFL news and notes here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. John, have a good night, pal.
Hey, thank you, guys.